Publishing is the business of making and selling books. And for cookbooks, it's a big business, as in over 20 million print cookbooks sold per year. Yet finding out how and how many actually sell can be incredibly confusing. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for curious writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Molly Stevens, and I'm joined by Andrea Nguyen, Kristen Donnelly, and Kate Leahy. In earlier episodes, we talked in depth about the making of cookbooks. But today, in the first of a multi-part series that looks at the cookbook marketplace, we're going to talk about book sales. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Hey, Molly.
Good, Molly.
It's great to see you guys, even though we're not all in the same place, but via video. Hey, a question I often hear from would-be and first-time cookbook authors is, how do I know how many books I've sold? What kind of book sale numbers are considered good or even good enough? I don't know. What numbers define success? Do you guys ask yourself this question or have answers to it?
You know, it depends, like right out of the gate. You know, I always think that that's the most exciting time, you know, the book launch. And the only way that you can really gauge, I think, is by looking at your Amazon rankings. And you see the rankings fall. I remember before my first book came out, someone who misunderstood the Amazon ranking said to me, well, you know, the higher that number is, the better, because that tells you how many books you sold. And I said, no. It's a ranking.
Right.
So you want a lower number.
Yeah, like number one is the best.
Right. You know, yes, number one, numero uno.
Yeah. Number 147,000, not so good.
Yeah, but maybe for that person, they thought, well, I sold that many books. God bless them.
Right. Yeah.
If only.
Yeah. But I do take a look at where, you know, my books are sitting on and around launch date.
Right.
That's smart. So you're talking about how to get a sense of sales before you actually see some kind of statement. Because there are statements eventually. That's cool. I never did that.
Oh gosh. This tells you what kind of an author I am.
Right. Do you refresh like crazy, especially early, like at the day of launch? It's just like, oh, did my numbers change? And it's like, okay, it's not good. It's not healthy to keep looking at the number, but it's like refresh. I don't do that. And maybe I should, because it's not like I've had a blockbuster seller. Yeah, I feel like I just spend so much time like focusing on promotion, but maybe I should have like promotion with a sales goal.
Right. And we did do a whole episode. We'll point listeners back to that. But Kate hosted a great episode on how to promote your cookbook, which talked about publicity timelines and a lot of things you do before launch. But the sales thing, I feel like, is this leap where it's no longer, it's out of your hands. The book is out and done. And it sometimes feels challenging for authors to get a hold of their actual sales figures. I have people often asking me like, well, how many have you sold? And I was like, I have to go check. So maybe we should start and talk about how many books does a publisher print? Kate, do you know how many copies of Wine Style were printed?
Nope.
Yeah.
I do not know the exact number of how many were printed. In the old days, when I saw like a cookbook contract, I always thought that they printed, this was my naive assumption, is that we talked a little bit about in episode 4, I believe, about cookbook contracts. There's escalators, and you have to, sell, say, 15,000 cookbooks to move up to the next round where your royalty rate is better. You make more money per book you sell. I always thought, well, okay, so they're going to print 15,000 books. So you sell those, then you get up to the next escalator. And that's not the case at all. We don't know how many they sell exactly. And that doesn't mean the next time they do a print run, it's a second edition. It's just that they're gauging the marketplace. Right now, it's really in flux with shipping complications and paper shortages. And so the numbers that maybe they would have done a couple of years ago are different. And we don't necessarily know exactly if it's 2,000 books they print, 5,000 books, more. If you're a huge author with a big platform, this will be in the thousand, like a very big number, but you don't know. I don't know. Maybe I should ask. Andrea, do you know?
I don't know. I don't ask. You know why I don't ask? Because that's really not my business. You know what my publisher's business is? Their business is supposedly to sell books.
Mm-hmm.
And so their business is managing inventory. And that's what print sales and print runs are about. So they're betting, this book's going to sell so many copies out of the gate. And we'll have to replenish the books at some point, hopefully. And so, I'm always happy when they turn around and they say, hey, Andrea, we just went through the first print run. We're going back for more. So, some of my books have had many, many print runs. Some of my books have had print runs like a month. I think Pho, when it came out, they had to go back very quickly. And same thing with Vietnamese Food Any Day. And my thought is, great, you didn't bet on me. And now maybe you should, but I don't really, and that's
Right.
just me being, tacky, but
no, competitive,
competitive. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that I've got a good product. You can sell it and you need to be selling my book because, there were times in the past when I would look at my editors and I'm like, aren't you guys in the business of selling books? Don't you want to sell books? Because it seemed like authors were there to write books and sometimes publishers were just there to make books, but not necessarily sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now we're in a different place with cookbooks.
For some reason, I had this number 10,000 in my head, that was what was considered, if your book sold 10,000, that was considered a, success. I talked to a publisher recently and she said it's a little bit more like 15,000 is, but what are we talking about? Are we talking about in a year? Are we talking about over the course of 3 years? And I so agree that it's not anything we can control or really keep tabs of, but there are some ways we can track the sales of our numbers, right? I mean, there are a few things that we can do to keep an eye on whether they're moving, because whether we can change it or not, but we do kind of want to know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I publish with 10-Speed Press, which is a part of Penguin Random House. And I, as an author, can go in and take a look at my sales and ship numbers. And sales numbers are numbers that are reported on like a weekly basis. And you can see like how many times, the barcode has been scanned through. And then the ship numbers reflects how many books that have been, sent to different retailers. And between that, you can figure out, like where you're sitting at. How many books are in circulation reflects the number of books that have been shipped.
And Andrea, is that across the board at Penguin Random House that all imprints have that portal?
Yeah.
Because I publish with Norton and they don't have an author portal. I can't have access to that. The only way to get those numbers is twice a year when I receive a royalty statement.
Molly, you should switch over, baby.
So I have to say that, the author portal is really, really helpful. And I noticed that when with my book Wine Style, which was also with 10-Speed Press, I saw a big discrepancy between the number of books shipped and the number of books sold. So I asked, do I need to be concerned that a lot of these books are going to be returned because there's just a discrepancy in the numbers? And what they said is for the books that are scanned, that Penguin Random House reports is scanned. And I think Molly said NPD Group used to be called BookScan. That's the same number. And what I was told, and I don't know, maybe you've heard otherwise, that is the number that is connected to Amazon and Barnes & Noble sales pretty much specifically, and that anytime your book is being sold in an independent store, a cookbook shop, a cookware shop, Costco, Anthropologie, those numbers aren't reflected in that sale number, but they're reflected in the shipped number. And that's something that you don't have access to unless you get your royalty statement every 6 months to show how much has been sold. But with Penguin Random House, you do get that little window. You can get that weekly synopsis of what's happening with your book.
But Kristen, do you have a portal, an author portal?
Yeah, the book was through Potter, which is part of Penguin Random House.
Yeah.
So there is the portal. But I will say at this point, the book is 5-ish years old, 5.5 years old. So I tend to just look at the royalty statements and not check up on it obsessively.
Right.
Although once again, maybe I should. The other thing that's interesting to me is with Modern Potluck, I've sold a significant number of ebooks, not just physical copies, and it's on a whole other track in a sense. It's listed out separately. The royalties that count against, it's a different percentage, but I thought that was really interesting.
That is, and it shows up. It's a whole separate page on a royalty statement. Speaking of shipped versus returns versus sold, the idea is that this seems to me very old, but that bookstores can order books. They get the books, they put them in their inventory. If they don't sell, they can return them.
Right. It's unusual. Not all products work that way.
Right.
No, I think it's a historic thing that publishers agreed to do it back in the olden days when it was really hard for booksellers to stay in business and publishers wanted to incentivize booksellers to take chances on more books. So they just built this in. And I think this goes back decades and decades. And now it's just kind of assumed that you can return books.
It's sort of upside downside, because on the upside, a bookseller will take a chance on a book that they're not sure they can sell. But the downside is you may have shipped 200 books in 1 month, and the next month you look at your numbers and half of those were returned. Or
right.
We talked about Amazon rankings a little bit, which, Andrea, can you talk about like where those numbers come from?
It reflects the activity surrounding your title. And they used to not tell you much about what those rankings were. But now, when you've published a book, whether you're with a traditional publisher or you self-publish and it's selling on Amazon, you can, create that author page where you put up your little bio and a headshot and stuff and link to your social media accounts and blogs and whatever. And they will explain to you what that ranking means. The last time I looked, the rankings reflect the activity surrounding your book. So, how many people are probably on your page as well as sales. And that gives you a sense of popularity. So, like some books do tremendously well upon, launch, like Kenji's Lopez Alt's Walk book came out, and I don't know, it was like around 40 something, and it was so exciting because for me, as someone who works in a lot of Asian foodways, to see one book on one extremely versatile cooking piece of cookware is extremely, extremely exciting. But, you want to look at that ranking, but you also, it goes up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So don't take it too seriously.
It's not just pure book sales, or is it? Like it must take into account both the lifetime as well as what's happening that week, or is it only what's happening that week?
It's pretty of the moment.
Okay.
And it's also broken out in categories too, right? It's overall, but then
so many categories.
Yeah.
Right. And then you'll notice this terrible thing of like squatters. You'll see like all of a sudden in like the Vietnamese category, there are these weird instant pot cookbooks that have nothing to do with Vietnamese cooking, but the authors know that, there are a lot of people that may search that category, and for some reason they can just do things to just kind of get them into the first ranking. And then there are also imposter books that get placed because they see something that's popular, and then they're like, hey, I'm just going to get a little bit of that action too. But again, you just got to know at the end of the day, you made a good book.
Right.
And that's going to prove its value to consumers.
When I think I was working on La Bouvette, when it finally was listed on Amazon, and that's something that the publisher does when you're traditionally published, I think the category that we were like the #1 book in Christian Bible studies.
What?
And it's sometimes like these categories get very arbitrary, but I noticed a lot of wine books were in this like Christian Bible study category. And then I think that later on it went away, but sometimes these Amazon categories are kind of hilarious. You're just like, am I really that? Okay, well, I don't think that's the target, but whatever. And then you kind of ask like, hey, why are we in that category? And they're like, we don't really, we can't really control much. Amazon is this behemoth. I will say from what I know about Amazon is that if you do get one of those tags, maybe you get that #1 book in Christian Bible studies or in something, if your category is very specific and you're the #1 book and you get that little flag, that can really help sales because you're in the algorithm. So your book will show up in other people's searches for books. So that's across the board for any Amazon product, but it definitely helps books. So if you have a very niche category and maybe your ranking on Amazon is not that impressive, but you're the #1 book in that category, that's good for discoverability.
Yeah. I was wondering because my book has an editor's pick flag, which is very nice. I like it. And
that's great. It's very good.
Yeah. I always wonder if that does anything. I mean, I know I'm attracted to those flags. They do help something stand out, but popular attracts popularity. So
Exactly.
Yeah, but you also, Amazon's one thing that's really great. They sell a lot of books for folks, but I also love talking to people at bookshops and seeing what happens. So those tags that we were just talking about, and some bookshops like my local independent bookstore, Bookshop Santa Cruz, their staff writes like little annotated like reviews of books they like, their shelf tags. And, it's really awesome because you can also get their feedback on what sells and also how books are displayed. So I think that for authors, it's a great way. Amazon's a great way to monitor sales, but you have other methods too, more traditional places to look like a regular old-fashioned brick and mortar bookstore.
Right. Deserving of putting your energy in. I mean, Amazon, I think we mentioned the author page on Amazon, and that really is a good tool. I don't want to spend this whole episode talking about Amazon.
No. Sure.
But an author page on Amazon is a good tool for discoverability. And the other thing is there's something called Author Central, which if you are with a publisher that does not have a portal for you to check out sales, that will give you access to book scan numbers. So I can go through my Author Central and find those book scan numbers that are not available to me on my own. I mean, I think a book scan subscription is like $2,500 or something. I mean, it's a professional thing, so it's not something an individual would do. And as you said, those book scan numbers aren't going to tell you every book that's sold, but they will give you an idea overall of what's happening. I think I've seen 75 to 85% accuracy is kind of reported. If someone buys in bulk, like if you do a big event and have 400 people come to it and you move a lot of books and you buy those directly from the publishers, those might not get scanned. I don't think they do. Although a way around that, if you want to make sure they get recorded, would be to have an independent bookstore come to that event, have them sell the books, and then every time they, scan that barcode or that ISBN. Not necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, we did events for when Lavash launched, and I was kind of just curious about the accuracy of those book scan numbers on Amazon. So what we did is we had one event where we sold 80 books, and we had another event where we sold 50 books, and we had another event. And then I went to see what the number was for that weekend of sales. And I think it counted about 48 books. So I asked the editor, and this was with a publishing house that did not have the author portal. And I just asked, I said, is this way? I mean, the accuracy was really way off. And she said, no, actually in my numbers that of course authors don't have access to, it said we sold XYZ number. So take the book scan numbers with a grain of salt. If you're seeing numbers that you're not really all that happy with, but you're getting traction with your book, that's what matters. I mean, I think that's the thing about sales is that we're always looking for validation that our book is good by that, oh, I'm selling a lot of books. And, books are really weird. Sometimes you could sell a lot of books in that first month. Sometimes your book is a quieter book and it takes a little bit more time to find its readers. So, but we're always looking, like that's the thing that you're going to ask your agent, like how many books do I need to sell to be considered a success? I mean, what do you have answers for that? And do you ask that question to yourself, or have you kind of just, figured a way around like, I'm going to be happy with my work and I'll keep moving on to the next project. So I'm not dwelling on sales numbers for the previous project.
Yeah. Because I think we've established we don't know how many they print. And we really have a hard time figuring out how many we sell. So what the hell are we doing in this for?
Yeah.
No.
Oh my gosh. Actually, can we talk about another opaque process, which is getting onto getting onto like the New York Times bestseller list, which does not happen that often for cookbooks, but it does sometimes. And it always cracks me up when people like try to hack it in a sense. There's no sure way to do it except obviously sell a ton of books. But
is this true? I read that they don't use Amazon sales.
Right. They have their own little secret.
Yes, the Wall Street Journal does. I mean, it's very...
Yeah. USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the bestseller lists vary. The only time I've made a bestseller list is with the Fall Cookbook. And I think that we sold a bunch of ebooks during a particular period of time. And all of a sudden, my editor emailed me and she goes, I was like looking and I noticed that pho was a bestseller. And I was like, really? When? and so, it's just kind of a fun thing. And I think now it seems more than ever, there are more cookbooks hitting bestseller lists than in the past. I'm not sure how many of those books sustain that level of sales except for out of the gate. I don't know. What I'm saying is that I think that there is so much excitement and momentum about food books right now, cookbooks right now, and beverage books that it can push the sales of a book out of the gate so strongly. And I think that, is validation for an author's ability to write more books. I mean, what's the validation? The validation is that you develop a career.
Right. And what are those terms of success? If clearly can't be numbers because we don't know what the numbers are. So what are some of the other reasons to write the book for success? It's validation, it's brand identity, it's, continuing.
And helping people.
Yeah.
Yes, helping people. I got an email from a couple in Philadelphia this past week, and they said that they were dating and they didn't live together, but they chose 2 cookbooks by authors that they really admire, me and Melissa Clark.
Nice.
They picked Melissa Clark's Cooking French book, right? And then they picked Vietnamese Food Any Day, and they would cook through the books and report to each other. And they cooked every single recipe in Vietnamese Food Any Day.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And at the end of it all, they got married.
Oh, that's nice.
I know.
What a good story.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
That was like the best, you guys. That and when kids like my food.
Right. Right. Back to the bestseller thing. I read somewhere that a book needs to sell 10,000 copies in the first week or in a week to hit the New York Times bestseller. And again, those have to be mostly independent brick and mortar stores. So it's heavily skewed away from self-published books as well. Mm-hmm. One of the things somebody told me when I wrote my first book, and it was published and it didn't do great out of the gate, sold a couple thousand here, a couple thousand there, is that they said, now you need to write a second book. I said, what? They're like, oh yeah, that helps sell the first book.
That's interesting.
We talk a lot about this on the podcast, the long game, right? So it's not just the launch, but for example, the terms backlist, front list. Mm-hmm. Publishers talk about a backlist, which I always thought was a bad thing because it sounds like you're put in the back of the catalog or whatever.
Which it kind of is in the back of the catalog, but it is books that have been published previous seasons. So they'll often focus for a season, and they have 2 to 3 seasons a year. So they'll put heavy focus and emphasis on those books. But some publishers are better than others at continuing to push their backlist through all their different channels. That's my understanding.
Right. So if a book gets backlisted, that means it keeps showing up in the catalog, even though the front list is there with all the new exciting, bright, shiny books. But you get to the end and there's your good old book that's been out for 3, 4, 5, 20 years in some cases, if it's a really steady, solid book.
It's like the little black dress, you guys.
There you go.
It's always going to be in your closet, or a really good pair of chinos or denim with good style.
Well, and you can think about it this way too. It's that, all right, say you're a cookware shop in the Napa Valley. You always are buying certain books from certain publishers every year, and you're going to go look through and you're thinking, I keep selling books on cheese. Every year I'm selling books on cheese. Do you have anything new on cheese? They're like, well, we still have the one from last year. Okay, I'll take more copies. Then they'll say, oh, do you have any new books on cheese? Well, we still have the same one, that great one that you sold so well from 3 years ago. You want more copies? Okay. So that's something that I don't think authors really ever think of, because no one thinks, I want to write the backlist book. However, if you write that backlist book and maybe you sell 10,000 copies for 10 years, now that is a successful book. Even if it didn't get any media mentions, even if its Amazon ranking is somewhere in the millions, you know what? If it's selling and it's circulating and there's 100,000 copies of it out there, it's definitely the long game, but it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a conversation a little bit about a classic cookbook, right? Kristen, what you want to share a little bit about classic cookbooks?
It's more just interesting because I went to a seminar a few years ago at an IACP conference. IACP is International Association of Culinary Professionals, and it was about what is a classic cookbook. And before the seminar and panel, I was talking to a fellow food writer, and she was like, oh, isn't a classic cookbook one that just sells for a really long time? And I was like, makes sense to me. And then I go to the panel, and there were very different definitions among the panelists. And one panelist thought basically sales numbers should be divorced from perception of a classic cookbook. Like a classic cookbook is one that adds to the conversation and I guess continues to have a message that resonates for a long time, but whether or not it's sold well is irrelevant. Other people thought sales were important. So
I mean, I guess the key is if it's not a blockbuster and the hope is to keep it out there for many years, is to be able to keep finding a way for people to continue to discover a book.
Exactly. Like, I think they might have been inducting some books into the Hall of Fame, and it might have been, maybe the seminar was tied to that. And I want to say one was Cooking from the Auberge of the Flowering Hearth, which I think is from 70s or 80s, French cookbook. Yep. And then there was the Dookie Taste book. I have no idea how either sold upon release, but they all seemed like very valid classic cookbooks and ones that, you know, in this profession, we should know and get familiar with.
I feel like, you know, the classics can straddle that notion of something that's of value, that's evergreen, that contributes to the literature, to, you know, just to use an academic frame of thinking about it. But also sales do reflect interest and generalizability. And I think a classic, you know, there are different ways to define it, but I think that you can combine those two. They're not mutually exclusive. Definitely. You know, when we think about classic cooking, you know, like diner food as being classic, you know, this sells a lot of biscuits and scrambled eggs and bacon, you know, and depends on whose classic we're talking about, you know.
Right.
So classic books are books that you want to keep around for a long time, and they are then probably going to be backlisted. Don't you think?
I sure hope so. I mean, but the thing is, it won't get backlisted unless it does sell steadily. I mean, they're not going to put a lot of resources and take up page space in the backlist for books that just haven't sold that well, because publishers have a lot of other books that they can put on their backlist and promote. So that's the thing. I think sales are absolutely crucial for a classic book to stay in circulation. However, I don't think you need to be on the New York Times bestseller list their first year of launch to become a classic cookbook down the road. But I do think that sales are a crucial part, because if the book isn't selling that well, maybe it goes out of print. And unless somebody discovers it and like brings it back to life and this person's really influential, that book just might kind of quietly go away.
I was going to say that might have been what happened with Auberge of the Flowering Hearth. Some people did seem to imply it didn't matter whether or not it was still in print to be considered a classic.
So that would be a cult classic, right?
I guess that's true. Yeah, right. There you go.
Oh my God, that would be wonderful. A cult cookbook classic. That's like the 3 C's.
Right. And then you find them either at libraries or at somewhere like Omnivore in San Francisco or someplace that specializes in old books.
I'm wrong, you guys, because I do have a book that I consider a classic and was inducted into the ICP classics category. It's Irene Kuo's Keys to Chinese Cooking, and it's out of print.
Yeah.
Yours truly has 5 copies.
You're rich in copies of that book. That's awesome.
I do imagine there are some books from at least like pre-photography era that maybe went out of print, but could see a second life.
Well, we talked about Salty early on in the podcast as a favorite of yours, Kristen. And I mean, I'm not sure if that qualifies as a classic, but it's a good book and you really loved it and it went out of print. But it is true, having, you know, writing more than one book, getting your name out there again can help people discover a previous work that you've worked on.
Yeah,
most definitely.
And that's crucial for self-publishing. Having more than one book, if you're going the self-published route, you should really think about, do you want to have 4 books out? Because that first book in self-publishing might not really get much traction, but maybe that second one, people discover it and think, oh, but this person has this first one too. They're legit. I might get that one also. So if you are going the self-published route or consider building in, you know, multiple ideas. And just think about it, because that really, I think, is crucial, especially because if you're selling a lot of your inventory on Amazon, having multiple titles under your name does help.
And also, if you're selling in a regular, you know, an independent bookstore, many of those are organized alphabetically. And if you have more than one title by you, you've created a little space for your name on a bookshelf.
Good point.
So talking about how you can keep a book out there for a while, what are things that authors can do well past launch? This isn't book promotion. We talk a lot about that in that episode about how to promote your book. But I think we often get tired of our work before many people have even had a chance to discover it. In fact, most people. So what can you do? Andrea, what do you think?
I think that you want to think about longevity. You know, we talked a lot about taking the long look, taking that particular perspective, because gosh, you think about how much time you spent making that book. You can't just invest all your efforts in like a few weeks or a few months to promote the book and then expect that to be the life of the book. The life of the book lives on much longer, and you can keep doing events. You can promote things on social media. You can do all kinds of things to get people to understand that your books are viable much, much longer. And also, people don't know about you and your books. So it's like important for you to like keep that discoverability going and the freshness too. Were people who thought that I had only written one book, Vietnamese Food Any Day. And when I would do something about my prior books, they're like, oh, you wrote that too? Oh, I didn't know you written other books. So Molly, yes, definitely. We get tired of ourselves, but other people find us potentially entertaining and invigorating. And we need to step outside of our own little, spheres and think about, again, shameless promotion. But it's not promotion too. It's just that you want to love your book for a long time. It's a baby and you want to raise it to adulthood and perhaps old age.
So good to remember. It's funny. I think about somebody like Marisa McClellan, who has written a lot of books on preserving. And for a long time, she now has 2 adorable twin toddlers. And with the pandemic, she hasn't been traveling as much, but every season she had a travel schedule where she would go to various fairs, state fairs, other kinds of fairs, all throughout preserving season to do events, book signings, whatever. And she sold a lot of books that way. And her books were nice little, like under $25, sort of like almost like impulse buy purchases. But I really admired her like chutzpah doing that. So that seems like a nice way to sell your books, especially if you're in a niche. Keep digging into that niche.
So I have a question on that. Do you guys put books in the trunks of your cars and drive around with them? I mean, do you hand sell books? If there's an opportunity like that, is that something you would do, or are you always working with a bookseller?
I sell books when I teach cooking classes, and I say to people, I'll offer you a discount because you're here and I want you to be able to take this book home with you. And sometimes people will bring their own copies for me to sign too. And I think that that is part of my interaction with cookbook users and cooks. So there are very charming times when I meet someone like at a party and I tell them about what I do. And then they're like, do you have a book in the trunk of your car that you can just sell me? I was like, no. But then a few years ago, I started putting them one copy of each of my books in my car because people would like ask, and they expect you to have, books in the trunk of your car. I was getting my teeth cleaned and the woman was so excited while I had stuff in my mouth. She was like, when I'm done here cleaning your teeth after I polish them, can I just like buy a copy of your book? And I was like, no, I would love it if you went to the local bookstore to buy the book. And she did.
That's cool.
That is cool.
How about you, Kate? Do you ever sell wine style?
Since it came out, it was still sort of in a lockdown on and off kind of thing. People, if they did contact me, I would say I can sign a book, buy it through, say, Omnivore Books. I have some signed over there and they'll ship it directly to you. So that was a way that they'd get the signed book. They would get it through a great store. And then it wasn't me figuring out when I was going to have time to schlep over to the post office and do it, and probably not have it as nicely packaged as it would be otherwise. So that was one thing, because it was sort of that pandemic. People still weren't comfortable coming to bookstores or going to in-person events, kind of leaning into that thing. But I do think, Andrea, that's pretty smart. Just put some books back of the trunk. And, because you're right, people ask. I taught a cooking class and I didn't have any books with me. And afterwards, people were like, well, why don't you have books with you? And I thought, well, I was invited by the school to do this class. And now I would just clarify with the school, hey, can I bring my books so I can sell them if anyone wants a copy afterwards? I would do that. Yeah, that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's like having the gift shop at the end of the museum tour or something.
Right.
People want to take it with them. They want to take their experience with them a little bit.
And you can, if you're with a traditional publisher, you could buy them at a discount from your publisher and have them. What I tend to do is, if possible, I get a local bookseller involved.
Same.
But then I'll go back to, I keep plugging those book stickers, book plates. If someone wants a book, it's sometimes hard to, you don't want them to ship the book to me and then I sign it and ship them to them. And my books tend to be heavy. So I say, listen, buy the book wherever you can, from your local bookseller, and I will mail you a book plate, which I've actually have book plates that a friend of mine who's a graphic artist designed, one for each book, so it kind of matches the style of the book. So graphically, it's appealing sitting inside it. So it doesn't quite just look like "Hello, my name is" sticker that you put in there.
I have signed those.
So nice.
Yeah,
that's so nice.
Yeah.
So I used to live in New York City for many years, and in New York City, there's so many authors. It's just a place where everything's like, what's new? What's next? What's new? What's next? What's new? What's next? So I sort of almost made the mistake of like hitting it hard for the first 6 months of book promotion and then sort of leaning back. And what I really admire, what you've done, Molly, you've done, Andrea, maybe you've done this, Kate, I don't know, but like almost becoming like a hometown hero. I now live in Pennsylvania, and I don't do that much to promote myself locally as an author. So maybe it's goals for the future, but I admire that you've done that. And I also think for longevity, if you can just promote in a nice way where you are by doing cooking classes and events, that is like a sort of a lifelong outlet.
And one thing I've also noticed just on book promotion, just getting your name out there in general too, especially if this is your first book and it's a little bit maybe harder to get noticed. In I think fiction debut authors, there's been this whole movement on social media where the authors have like this debut group and everyone is like part of this group. So if everyone's book is coming out in 2022, they all kind of band together and support each other and get really excited for their debut book because they're all first-time authors. It's all new to them. They're all trying to figure it out as they go, as we keep doing every single time we launch a book. But I just thought that was really great. I haven't seen that in the cookbook world of people coming together, say, we're all the spring launch of 2022, or we're the fall launch of 2023, and just really taking it into sort of like creating your own cookbook club out of it. And I think that could be something going forward, thinking like leaning into that social media that I think would be really fun. And I think it also could help get attention to a bunch of new authors.
That's a great idea.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, some, of the bookstores will do like fall lists or by the week. Now Serving in LA does some cool stuff like pub dates, always like on Tuesdays, and they'll like say, hey, these are the books coming out this week. But I don't see the authors like necessarily turning around doing that on their own. It's probably like so nerve-wracking for first-time authors to do something coordinated like that. So I think it's up to us. Are we old geezers now?
No.
Well, it could also come from the push of like the publishers kind of doing some matchmaking and saying, hey, we've got these new authors coming out. Do you guys want to do something together? Because I think it would be cool. And it really would be fun for us to then promote that new class of authors coming up. Like the class of 2022, let us know who you are. So maybe we can start it on our own Instagram channel.
Well, this is great. And this kind of feeds into, Kate, what's coming next in this little mini series that we're doing on the Cookbook Marketplace, because we're going to be talking about competition and criticism. And it does sort of talk about those both really look at the books that are coming out at the same time. So it's an interesting question. And I think that, the books that come out at the same time, they affect each other, influence each other. I mean, you think about like, it was all baking all the time. It was all air frying, there are these trends that happen. And so they're just organically grouped. So maybe there's a way to sort of have a little more intention around the grouping.
Right. We're all in it together. We're not, we don't have to knock each other out. That person did a pickling book. They're dead to me because I have a pickling book. Like that shouldn't be how it is.
Oh, I'm going to write a potato cookbook now.
No, you can't, because Molly already did one.
It's out of print though. It's a fair game.
No, I'm just going to take her content.
Yeah. It's a big book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just do that. Well, that's a lot of that we know and don't know about book sales.
Basically, we know enough to know we don't know anything.
Anybody have any final words on book sales?
We have gone through so much in terms of the life of a book, from conception to birthing and then to, cultivating and adulting the book, I guess we could say. But, the sales are important if you're looking to have a career, but also if you want to continue making a statement and contribute to people's lives in terms of good cooking. You can decide to not pay attention to them, but I think that every author should pay attention to cookbook sales and ask questions. I know, we don't talk about numbers as much, but I'm not sure what numbers are, because if you got a really big advance, you might not really care that much about sales aside from the obligatory first few weeks or months of promotion. And you're like, I'm done with it because I'm walking away with a huge amount of money. But if you decide to take a smaller advance and you just really love that hustle because you want to earn out and you want to, keep those royalty checks coming in until your retirement, then that's a different goal. And it goes all the way back to some of the discussions we've had in earlier episodes. So I'm really glad, Molly, that you decided to do this episode, because I think that it's part of that thread, that through line of the life of a cookbook.
Kate, Kristen, anything to add to that? That was pretty good.
Yeah, that was a great closer. I don't want to sully it, but I would just say, remember, publishers are playing Moneyball. They're going to invest in certain titles. They're going to see what sticks. Sometimes the breakout books are things that the publishers never anticipated. A lot of sales are out of our hands. So focus, like what Andrea always goes back to, is this the best book you can create? And also know that you're going to do your part and keep getting the word out about your book. And you can't really worry about what the sales team is doing because they're all hidden from us.
Kristen?
I think something that is good to remember is that lots of press and lots of accolades don't always equal lots of sales. And I think all are nice to have, but I found it really interesting to see that it doesn't always correspond. And we'll talk more about that, especially about awards and competitions. But yeah, something to keep in mind, because it surprised me from my own experience. Modern Potluck got a ton of press, did well. I would say the sales were respectable, but I think people saw the press and were like, oh my gosh, this is like a mega bestseller. But I've heard that also from other people. And on the flip side, people might not get a ton of press for their books, especially in the beginning, but those things might sell for a really long time because they address topics people are always looking for, or that author is, like I was talking about Marisa earlier, she was out there for years hand selling that book. And as Molly, you always say, you sell books one by one. So something to keep in mind.
Such a good point.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I struggle with sales in terms of how to think about it because I don't follow it as closely as maybe I should. It took me many years to figure out how to read a royalty statement, and I think we might tackle that in a future episode. But I come back to why, I think I'm just going to underscore what Andrew said, is why I chose a book in the first place, as opposed to another format. And we talked about other formats, could this be a digital? Could this be and a book by nature needs to get in other people's hands for it to have a life. Otherwise, why did you publish? And so sales are part of publishing. Publishing, back to what I said at the beginning, publishing is the business of making and selling books. And so if you are to publish, you are in the business of making and selling. So on that, anybody have a book that's not ours to talk about?
Well, I do have a book that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. It's somebody who doesn't need my endorsement. She's a really well-known author in her own right, but Claudia Roden, her latest book is Claudia Roden's Mediterranean. And I believe this might be the last book she does. And it's just this really, the head notes, if, I get a little long-winded with head notes, it's refreshing to see a book that's so just, the head notes are just exactly what they need to be and breezy, but it's also, there's just so much knowledge behind each recipe. And this is kind of like a collection of the recipes that have resonated throughout her really long career. But there was something in this book that I haven't tried yet, but I'm really intrigued. And it is boiling lemons. You put an entire lemon in a pot of water and you boil it until it's soft. And then she uses it in a couple of ways. So like say braised chicken legs, where you take the seeds out, but you chop up the whole lemon, pulp, rind and everything and put it into the stew. So in a way, it's almost like that whole idea of like a preserved lemon, but without having to do all the waiting and the time. And she also uses it in like a cooked Moroccan style salad. So I just thought boiled lemons. I just have never come across that. Has anyone?
Well, I've not seen the boiled, like the clementine cake, which is I believe that's a British recipe where you boil whole citrus and then grind them up and use that pulp and it makes a sweet cake. I believe the one I'm thinking of is a Nigella Lawson one, but I think it goes back before her. So I wonder if there's a thread there. That's so interesting.
Does she use the liquid?
You know, I didn't see the liquid called for, but it was one of those things where I would check out and see what the liquid's like. But you can boil the lemons, and then if you don't use all the lemons you've boiled, you just cover them with a little sunflower oil and keep them in the fridge and pull them out. So it's almost like a quick preserved lemon, which means that you wouldn't have to sit there and like soak the lemon rind in. And she uses the pulp and everything too. So I don't know. I thought it would be kind of a fun way. If anyone has if you're in California and you have lemons in your backyard and you got some free citrus to experiment with, this is a great way to preserve some.
It's cool. I love the whole citrus, the bitterness. That's great, Kate. Thanks for sharing that.
But it's a beautiful book. I've been enjoying paging through.
All her books are amazing. Talk about classics.
Yeah,
there you
exactly.
go. You go.
There you go. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Molly.
Woohoo!
Yay, Molly. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. If you have questions about cookbooks or anything you've heard on the show, contact us through our website, everythingcookbooks.com. If you have a second to spare, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Everything Cookbooks. This helps more people find the show. Much gratitude to our editor, Abby Circatello. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.